Have you ever wondered why some people seem to see things others miss? Why they stay calm when others panic? Why they make decisions that just work? It's not luck, and it's not talent. It's a different way of thinking, one that most people never learn, because they're trapped inside invisible habits of the mind, not out of weakness, but out of comfort. Today, we're going to quietly break out of that trap, not with hype, but with clarity. If you're ready to think differently, to move through the world a little wiser, stay with me. What comes next might surprise you. 1. Cognitive bias, the trap inside you. There's a quiet force shaping every decision you make, one that whispers through your thoughts, influences your judgment, and often leads you into error without you ever realizing it. This isn't fate. It's not luck. It's something far more subtle: cognitive bias, a term modern psychology uses to describe the systematic patterns of deviation from rationality that infect our thinking. But the Stoics understood this long before it was named. To them, the battle was always internal. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thinking is distorted, your entire reality follows the harsh truth. Most people aren't thinking, they're reacting. They confuse emotion with evidence, instinct with insight, and familiarity with fact. They're not free thinkers, they're reflex machines. And if you don't learn to rise above these inherited patterns, you will become what the Stoics feared most: a slave to your own mind. Cognitive bias is not just a psychological concept, it's a philosophical trap. It tricks you into believing that what feels true must be true. You see one plane crash on the news, and suddenly flying feels dangerous. Never mind that you're statistically more likely to slip in your bathroom. That's the availability heuristic at work, a mental shortcut that equates emotional intensity with likelihood. And the result, you fear shadows and ignore real threats. You make decisions not based on facts, but based on how easily an image or story comes to mind. The Stoics would call this a failure of logos, reason, the divine faculty that separates us from animals. But here's the Stoic insight that most overlook: it's not just them, it's you, too. You fall into bias, you distort reality, you defend beliefs just because they're yours. Epictetus would remind us that it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them, and our opinions are often polluted by invisible forces we've never stopped to question. We see someone driving recklessly and immediately judge them as selfish, without considering that they may be rushing to a hospital. That's the fundamental attribution error, another mental trap, one that the Stoics would call an error of ego and haste. The real danger of cognitive bias isn't in how it clouds our view of others, but in how it chains our potential. You cannot grow if you never question yourself. You cannot become wise if you always assume your thoughts are pure. Most people live on mental autopilot, mistaking impulse for insight. They never stop to ask, is this belief true or just familiar? Am I reacting or reasoning? To think clearly is a moral act. It is an act of courage, because to think clearly, you must be willing to admit you were wrong. You must be willing to destroy your cherished narratives and rebuild them on firmer ground. That is the Stoic way: clarity over comfort, reason over reaction. This is why Seneca urged us to associate with those who will make a better man of you, because you cannot see your own bias in isolation. You need friction, you need mirrors. Let's revisit that plane crash example. The fear that arises isn't random, it's your brain favoring emotion over probability. But imagine if, in that moment, you stepped back and asked, Is this fear based on evidence or emotion? That simple pause is everything. It's the space between animal and philosopher, between panic and perspective. The Stoics believed that in that space lies your freedom. Cognitive bias works in other ways too. Confirmation bias. The tendency to seek only what supports our existing beliefs traps you in echo chambers. You dismiss ideas not because they're wrong, but because they're unfamiliar. The Stoic response: cultivate intellectual humility. Let your identity be rooted in seeking truth, not defending assumptions. The wise man, as Epictetus says, knows that he knows nothing. That doesn't make him weak. It makes him free. There's also the status quo bias, the deep resistance to change. Simply because change feels uncertain, we hold on to toxic habits, relationships, and routines, not because they serve us, but because they are familiar. This bias is lethal to growth. It is the mind's way of choosing comfort over transformation. But as any Stoic will tell you, comfort is a poor teacher. Discomfort is where the sharpening happens. Bias tells you to avoid discomfort. Wisdom tells you to lean into it deliberately. The Stoics were not free of bias. They were aware of it, and that awareness was their weapon. They trained themselves to pause before reacting, to examine the impulse, to ask, is this useful? Is this good? Is this in line with virtue? Bias may be hardwired, but character is built, and that building begins when you stop being at the mercy of your instincts. Bias is insidious precisely because it doesn't feel wrong. It feels natural. It feels obvious. But obviousness is often a mirage. Remember, fire feels warm right up until it burns you. Bias feels like clarity right up until it costs you your peace, your relationships, your freedom. That's why the Stoic path begins with self-suspicion, with examining the mind like a battlefield general surveys a map. Where are the weak points? Where am I exposed? What needs reinforcement? The moment you begin to question your own judgments, not out of self-doubt, but out of discipline, that is the moment you rise above the 90%, because the average person defends their bias like a fortress. The uncommon man deconstructs his bias like a craftsman sharpening a blade. So the next time a strong opinion rises in your mind, don't just express it, examine it. Ask, where did this belief come from? Do I believe this because it's true or because it's familiar? Am I thinking or just reacting? Most people will never ask these questions, but you're not here to be most people. You're here to master yourself. And that mastery begins not with the loud victory, but with the quiet choice to think deeply, clearly, and courageously. 2. Second-order thinking. See beyond now. There is a habit quiet, rarely taught, but transformative that separates those who drift through life from those who quietly outmaneuver it. It doesn't require genius. It doesn't require speed. It requires depth. It's called second-order thinking, and once you learn it, you'll start to see why so many people lose at relationships, at careers, at self-respect, without ever understanding what went wrong. The Stoics would have called this habit foresight guided by reason, the ability to see past impulse and into consequence, and it is one of the rarest forms of discipline in a world addicted to immediacy. Most people live in the realm of first-order thinking. They see a situation and respond only to what's directly in front of them. I'm tired, so I'll skip the gym. I'm frustrated, so I'll snap back. I'm bored, so I'll scroll for a bit. First-order thinkers stop at the surface. They chase relief, not results. They choose what feels good now and ignore the chain of events that unfolds later. But second-order thinking is different. It's the mental habit of asking, And then, what you play the tape forward. You examine not just the first domino, but the ones that fall after it. You ask, what's the ripple effect of this choice, not just today, but a week from now, a year from now, a decade from now? Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," but he also understood that the imagination, when disciplined, becomes a tool of liberation. Second-order thinking is disciplined imagination. It's seeing the quiet cost behind easy decisions. When you skip the gym today, second-order thinking doesn't judge you, it investigates. What does that choice do to your sense of momentum? How does it affect your self-respect? What story are you telling yourself, and what happens when that story becomes your identity? Soon, it's not just one skipped workout, it's a broken promise to yourself. And broken promises accumulate. They form rust on your character. This is how most people fail, not through dramatic collapse, but through a slow erosion of standards. And the worst part, they think it's harmless. They think they're just taking a break, when in fact, they're quietly drifting into chaos. That's the trap of first-order thinking. It comforts you in the moment, but it bankrupts you over time. The Stoics were obsessed with cause and effect. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to look at every emotion and every impulse with suspicion, not because he wanted to suppress life, but because he wanted to see it clearly, to live without illusion. And that's exactly what second-order thinking offers: clarity in a world full of noise. It gives you the ability to pause before a decision and say, if I follow this path, where does it lead? Not just emotionally, strategically, existentially. Let's take another example. Imagine you're in a heated conversation. Someone insults you. The first-order reaction is simple: strike back, prove your strength, win the moment. But second-order thinking stops you. It whispers, what's the cost of this reaction? What does it teach the other person about your composure? What does it teach you about your discipline? And most importantly, what is the long-term value of winning a moment, if it means losing your peace? In that pause, you choose whether to escalate or elevate, and if you choose the latter, you've already outmaneuvered 90% of people, because 90% of people are slaves to the moment. Second-order thinking requires effort, yes, but not effort of force, effort of attention. It's a mental habit, a Stoic skill, and like any skill, it sharpens with use. The more often you ask, and then what, the more instinctive it becomes. Soon, you begin to spot the traps before you fall into them. You begin to see how certain words, certain temptations, certain indulgences always carry a hidden tax. The wise man doesn't avoid joy, he simply refuses to buy it on credit. The power of second-order thinking is that it's predictive. It turns you into a strategist in your own life. While others are caught in the thorns of today, you're already preparing for the terrain of tomorrow. It's not that you're smarter, it's that you're thinking longer. You're playing the long game. That's what Seneca meant when he said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." First-order thinkers waste time because they can't see past it. Second-order thinkers use time because they know where it's leading. And here's something else the Stoics would want you to understand. Second-order thinking isn't about paranoia or perfectionism. It's about choosing deliberation over distraction. It's about anchoring your life in reason so deeply that when the storm comes, and it always does, you don't get tossed around like everyone else. You remain grounded, focused, intact. Think of your mind as a battlefield. First-order thoughts are the ambushes. They hit you fast. They feel urgent. They demand response. Second-order thinking is your scout. It surveys the field. It maps the terrain. It keeps you alive. When you respond from the first order, you survive. When you respond from the second, you ascend. Let's return to the gym example, not as a fitness decision, but as a metaphor. Skipping a day seems small, but second-order thinking sees the link between motion and momentum. It sees how quickly one deviation becomes a new default. That's why it matters. Not because every workout counts, but because every decision counts. Every choice is a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. This is what the Stoics meant by living with intention. It's not about rigidity, it's about clarity. It's about knowing that your actions are seeds, and your future is the harvest. Most people throw seeds without care, and then curse the garden. The Stoic, the strategist, the second-order thinker, they plant with patience, they water with thought, they prune with discipline, and when the seasons turn, they're not surprised by the fruit. They saw it coming. So ask yourself, what kind of thinker do you want to be? The one who lives by the reaction of the moment, or the one who lives by the vision of what comes next? Because that vision, that quiet foresight, is how you outsmart not just people, but your own past. And once you learn to think like this, not just emotionally, but structurally, you'll realize something profound. Most people aren't losing because they're weak. They're losing because they don't think far enough. You do. That's your edge. That's your power. That's the difference that sets you apart, and the world will never see it coming. 3. Feel less. Think clearly. Let's go deeper beyond instinct, beyond impulse into the battlefield where the real war is fought, the space between feeling and thinking. Your brain, remarkable as it is, isn't always your ally. It evolved to conserve energy, not to seek truth. It favors shortcuts, emotional signals, and easy answers. It prefers to scroll rather than solve, to react rather than reason. That's why you might spend hours avoiding one difficult decision, chasing distractions, pretending it's just not the right time. That's not laziness, it's a design flaw, and unless you confront it, it will quietly rob you of clarity, confidence, and control. The Stoics understood this dilemma long before neuroscience gave it a name. They saw that left untrained, the mind will become a servant of emotion, not its master. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That is not just a quote, it's a map, and to follow it, you must begin retraining your brain to think, not just feel, not just to react to the world, but to reflect upon it. Thinking real. Thinking is not passive, it is effortful. It's a skill that must be sharpened, and like any muscle, it grows through resistance. But our modern world rarely asks us to reflect. It rewards quick opinions, easy outrage, and surface-level certainty. This is why mediocrity has become the norm, not because people lack intelligence, but because they've never been taught how to wield it with discipline. That's where you break the pattern. Here's how: before making any decision, pause, not for dramatic effect, but to create space. In that space, ask yourself, what's the opposite of what I believe right now? What if I'm wrong? This isn't about self-doubt. It's about mental strength. Arguing against your own opinion is one of the most powerful exercises in intellectual self-mastery. It's hard, it's uncomfortable. That's exactly why it works. Most people only seek evidence that confirms what they already believe. That's called confirmation bias. But you're not most people. You're here to build the kind of mind that can walk into any situation and see it clearly, because you've trained it to challenge itself first. You don't want to win arguments. You want to understand. And understanding requires the courage to question even your most cherished beliefs. Think of it like this: when emotion surges, fear, anger, ego, that's the signal to slow down, not speed up. Ask yourself, what would I think if I were someone else looking at this situation from the outside? Am I thinking, or am I just feeling? This simple shift in awareness is not small. It is the turning point between reaction and reason, between chaos and clarity. The Stoics didn't fear emotion, they just didn't worship it. They trained themselves to recognize its presence without surrendering their judgment. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, and how you react begins with how you think. If you let your feelings drive your decisions, you become a passenger in your own life. But when you train your brain to think deeply, to question itself, to resist the lure of easy answers, you become the driver." This isn't just about big decisions either. It's about daily practice. Every conversation, every impulse, every micro-decision is a chance to either strengthen or weaken your mind. Do you react with offense or pause and examine what's really being said? Do you act on fear or investigate its source? These moments matter more than you think, because over time, your default mode becomes your destiny. And let's be honest, this kind of thinking is rare. That's why it's powerful. That's why it sets you apart. You begin to see patterns others miss. You navigate conflict with poise. You resist manipulation because you've trained your mind to seek truth, not comfort. And the best part, it compounds. The more you practice it, the sharper it gets. Soon, what once felt unnatural becomes instinctive. So here's the bottom line. Your brain was not built to make you wise. It was built to keep you safe. But you're not here just to survive. You're here to lead, to understand, to evolve. And that requires training, not in the gym, but in the stillness between your thoughts. That's where the real transformation happens. Not when you feel right, but when you think clearly. That's what separates the reactive from the reflective, the crowd from the philosopher, the lost from the lucid. And now you know the truth. Thinking is a choice, one you can make every single day. 4. Reclaim your mind. Most people are not thinking, they're echoing. They scroll through endless feeds, consume other people's opinions, mimic the moods of the masses, and call it awareness. But what they're really doing is reinforcing a loop they never chose. It's a quiet, deceptive kind of imprisonment, the mental echo chamber, a world where thoughts aren't examined, emotions aren't questioned, and beliefs aren't earned. It's comfortable, it's familiar, and that's why it's dangerous. The Stoics would call this slavery not of the body, but of the soul. You see it every day, people reacting more than reflecting, jumping to conclusions, sharing outrage, defending views they've never actually challenged. They say, "That's just how I feel," as if feeling is proof of truth. But emotion is not always a compass. Sometimes it's a trickster. Epictetus warned us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. In other words, emotion may be real, but it is not always wise. And if you never ask whether your feelings are helping or harming you, you're not free. You're just being moved by the tides of your own unexamined thoughts. Here's the Stoic alternative: pause. Just pause. Not forever, just long enough to ask the questions most people never dare to ask. What if I'm wrong? What am I not seeing? Is this emotion sharpening my insight or clouding it? These are the questions that free you. These are the questions that make you dangerous in the best way, because once you start thinking this way, you stop being predictable. You stop following the script that everyone else is stuck in, and suddenly you start noticing things, patterns, inconsistencies, motives that others miss completely. And let's be clear, this isn't about becoming cynical or emotionally numb. It's about becoming discerning. You're not closing your heart, you're opening your eyes. You're not rejecting emotion, you're training it to serve reason, not rule it. Marcus Aurelius himself wrestled with the chaos of the world, but he found clarity by asking better questions. Does this make me a better man? Is this within my control? That's not passive reflection, that's mental warfare, and it's exactly how you break free from the echo chamber. You learn to think beyond what everyone else is repeating. The beauty of this discipline is that it doesn't require brilliance. It requires bravery. It takes courage to interrupt your mental autopilot. It takes strength to admit that your first reaction might not be your best one. But this is the edge that sets you apart. While others are stuck on emotional repeat, you become deliberate or measured and clear. And in a world drowning in noise, clarity is power. People often mistake this for genius or intuition, but it's neither. It's not magic, and it's not luck. It's a habit, a quiet, consistent practice of stepping back, asking harder questions, and refusing to be a slave to the moment. That's all. And yet, it's everything. Because when you develop this kind of inner discipline, you start out maneuvering people not because you talk louder or move faster, but because you see deeper, you think clearer, and most importantly, you choose your response when others are still trapped in their reaction. So train your mind to pause, to doubt, to reflect, because every time you do, you step out of the echo and into true mastery. If you've made it this far, pause for a moment, not to consume more, but to consider more. What will you do with what you've just learned? Will it become just another insight you scroll past, or the start of something deeper? You don't need more noise, you need clarity. And clarity begins the moment you stop drifting and start choosing. If this resonated with you, subscribe for what's coming next. We're only just getting started. And in the comments, write, think beyond a quiet signal that you're done playing small. This isn't about outsmarting others to win. It's about mastering yourself so you no longer need to. The next chapter will challenge you even more, but for now, carry this with you. The strongest mind isn't the one that knows everything. It's the one that questions with discipline and acts with intent.